Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Welcome to tonight's event. I am Laura Rajkovic, and I am the interim director of the Leslie-Lohman Museum, and I'm so thrilled that you're here with us tonight. I just wanted to say that, this is my very last Leslie-Lohman event. My last day is next Wednesday. And so I'm delighted that for nearly the entire time I've been the interim director of the museum, I've been working with Rashaad, and I just want to thank Rashaad for coming along this journey with me, and also to say I'm really excited to have met Kiyan, and super excited for the project that they've got rolling tonight. It's going to be a really casual kind of let's get together and cook, which is like one of my favorite things to do. So I want to particularly thank our friends and colleagues over at EYEBEAM who have been enormously generous in lots of ways supporting this particular event, and more generally Rashaad's work over time, including the extraordinary event that they've got coming up from February 17th to the 20th, called From the Rupture: Ideas and Actions for the Future, which is an enormously awesome 4-day on and offline festival of ideas celebrating their digital fellowship, Rapid Response for a Better Digital Future. And Rashaad is one of those fellows, and I will be hosting day 2 of that event. So tune in. You can go to fromtherupture.eyebeam.org to sign up for that. I just want to quickly do a little access check. Closed captions are enabled. Links will be shared in the chat, and questions can be asked in the Q&A. My colleague Nirvana will moderate ask questions that are shared when we get to the Q&A section of the event. I also wanted to just identify myself for access purposes. I am a white 48-year-old, just turned 48 this week, so I'm still sort of celebrating my birthday. White woman, I'm wearing glasses and a dark sweater, and I have blonde stripes in my hair. And just to say that, this journey we've been on with Rashaad has included 3 main elements: a gorgeous event that we held in Times Square that was part of Black Magic, this extended 3-part project. Rashaad's film was broadcast across the screens in Times Square every night during the month of December as part of Times Square Art's Midnight Moment, and we were delighted to be able to hang out with them for the month. We also installed one of his beautiful, gorgeous wallpaper. Well, not wallpapers, it was a tincture, but Rashaad has it in his house as a wallpaper there in our windows at the museum, and that just came down. However, the film, Black Magic, is available for your viewing pleasure at blackmagic.leslielohmanprojects.org. And that link is in the chat, but also on the landing page of our homepage, leslielohman.org. So I just want to say that tomorrow we are reopening Leslie-Lohman's museum, which is phenomenal after many, many months of being closed, with a beautiful show of the work of Laura Aguilar, and a group show of artists whose work is really phenomenal, and all of the artists are part of our fellowship program, including Kiyan. And so he will be featured in that exhibition opening tomorrow. So please come by the museum. There are time tickets available. It's super safe. We're doing all of the protocols, so come on by, get a ticket this weekend. Next weekend we're open on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. You can find the hours on the website. So Now to the intro, to the bios. I just want to tell you a little bit about Rashaad and Kiyan in case you don't know their awesomeness already. Rashaad, as we all have experienced at Leslie-Lohman and everyone who's been part of our programs, really celebrates really deep improvisation that he's pulling from advertising, the internet, art history, Black and queer culture. And he produces these gorgeous works that just, as he says, walk a tightrope between social practice, abstraction, and intersectionality. And I think, one of his real signatures is celebrating Black contributions to the arts canon, and really creating innovative and inclusive formats for culture and media. And Rashaad lives between Brooklyn and Oakland, and he's exhibited everywhere. He is a rock star, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Whitney Museum, the Centre Pompidou. I mean, you name it, he's been there. And I think, very importantly, Newsome it has been awarded very prestigious awards, including the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Artist Residency last year and this year, as well as the EYEBEAM Rapid Response Fellowship, and in 2019, the LACMA Art and Technology Lab grant. So he is a visionary, and I'm so thrilled that he's here tonight to cook with Kiyan. Kiyan's an artist who, as I mentioned, is part of our fellowship program. And, the work is extremely fluid across sculpture, performance, and video. He got his BA from Stanford and his MFA from Columbia. His work has also been exhibited in many beautiful venues, including the Sculpture Center, the Jewish Museum, Brooklyn Museum, and Socrates, and the Shed. And my apologies, I just mispronounced Kiyan, so I apologize. Kiyan has given artist talks and lectures at the Guggenheim, the Hirshhorn, and the Studio Museum, in addition to many other prestigious places, and his work is now on view as part of the exhibition Dissolutions, which, as I said, is open tomorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to the main event, our little cooking kiki, and I am delighted that that you are all here with us. Thank you and welcome.
Hi everyone, welcome to Creative Cookbook, a soulful reimagining of the artist talk. Creative Cookbook is a series of talks that consist of two artists preparing a meal and using the meal prep as a jumping off point to talk about their work and contemporary culture. I'm happy to start this series with one of my favorite artists, Kiyan Williams. Kiyan Williams is a multidisciplinary artist from Newark, New Jersey, who works fluidly across sculpture, performance, video, and 2D realms. An artist after my own heart. Rooted in a process-driven practice, they are attracted to quotidian, unconventional materials and methods that evoke the historical, political, and ecological forces that shape individual and collective bodies. Williams earned a BA with honors from Stanford University and an MFA in visual art from Columbia University. Their work has been exhibited at Sculpture Center, the Jewish Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Socrates Sculpture Park, Recess Art, the Hirshhorn Museum, and the Shed. Williams' honors and awards also include an Estrella Foundation Global Arts Fund and Stanford Arts Award. They were selected to participate in the 2019 In Practice Other Objects Emerging Artists exhibition at Sculpture Center and are among the inaugural cohort of artists commissioned by the Shed. Williams was previously an artist fellow at Leslie-Lohman Museum and is an alum of the Emergency Fellowship at the Hemispheric Institute for Performance and Politics at NYU. Williams is the recipient of the 2019/2020 Fountainhead Fellowship at Virginia Commonwealth University, where they were faculty in the Sculpture and Extended Media Department. So without further ado, we're going to get to cooking this meal.
Is this thing on?
Is this thing
recording?
Kiyan, it's so good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining me as we make this meal. in celebration of Marlon Riggs' birthday that just
Indeed,
passed.
indeed.
Yes, who is like a huge source of inspiration for us both, I believe.
Totally.
So thank you all for coming out. I hope you all got your ingredients. So just, to give you a little bit of information, yes, this is the first and hopefully a series of talks that I do with various artists where we make a meal and just talk about our work. And so it's a soulful reimagining of the artist talk. And so tonight we're going to make a meal that is very specific to where I come from, New Orleans, Louisiana. We're going to make gumbo. This particular version of gumbo I call Black Magic Gumbo, in the spirit of the Black Magic exhibition. Gumbo is, there are various ways to make it. And so by all means, please, I welcome you all to improvise as you make your version. And so, gumbo starts with a roux. And so I'm going to walk you through the roux. So Kiyan, you have your butter?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to raise my heat to about like somewhere between high and medium. We're going to put our butter in. Butter makes everything good. It's the secret to French cuisine. So we just melt the butter a little bit. So this is the beginnings of making a roux. And I liken the preparation of gumbo to having a interdisciplinary art practice. You just improvise and you keep adding things until you get what you want. And the roux is sort of like the foundation that helps you achieve a very particular thing. And so, Kiyan, what role does improvisation play in your work?
That's a great starting question. I think of improv as like both an approach, an approach to art making, and I would even say like an approach to life. But in particular, what I'm thinking about is like improv as it emerges in like Black expressive culture, music and dance. It's sort of an approach or method in which you have like, your structure, or you have like your main ingredients, be they like movement, gesture, sound. And then sort of across time, you riff off of those gestures. So in my own practice, particularly in my performances, I'll like have a series of movements or gestures or actions, and then I will repeat them or loop them over time in order to build a performance.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, Kiyan, do you have your butter? Is it melted?
It's still melting. Now I know that
It's
when
still
you make a
melting.
roux, you have to be very pay attention to the color, correct?
Right, but we're not there yet. So my butter is melted. And so
Okay.
once you get your butter melted, you're gonna add in the seasoning. And so the seasoning, everybody, is like the onions, ginger, garlic, all those things that were on the list. Now my gumbo, I kind of it kind of has an element of West African red stew. I don't like chop everything. I blend it all, and I do like tomatoes, onions, ginger, garlic, and sometimes a habanero. I'm not using a habanero tonight, but that's sort of my seasoning base for my gumbo. So I'm gonna go ahead and add, these seasonings. And you can do it in different ways, like, whatever seasonings you like, you just add to it.
And I add them all at once.
Yeah, you add them all at once. And you're gonna let that simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes. But don't ever stop stirring because you don't want it to stick. And so we're gonna keep stirring that for about 20 minutes, and then we're gonna start adding flour. And flour is really what gives us our roux. And as you said, yeah, the color of the roux is important. You want it to be kind of like a golden brown color. Some people like a darker one, but it should be at least like kind of like a golden brown color. And a trick for those of you who may be struggling with making the roux is that a way to kind of get it to the color you need is you can always add a little soy sauce, and that also helps.
Oh.
Little cooking trick, you know. So Kiyan, is there a specific piece of art or experience that inspired you to become an artist or to make work?
Let's see. I recall one of the first artists whose work I encountered when I was an undergrad, who had a really big impression on me, was Ana Mendieta. I remember seeing the documentary about her life, Fuego de Tierra, and being introduced to like a really expansive way of art making, that wasn't just, you know, rooted in a studio practice, but that was like, that included like being outside in the world. And I remember being particularly moved by her engaging with like earth in different like site-specific landscapes as a way to consider, you know, the conditions of, you know, displacement and belonging, those questions that impacted her own life. Yeah, so that was a huge inspiration for me. And then also Marlon Riggs, as you mentioned earlier, whose birthday is today. Shout out to Marlon, the Blueprint.
Oh,
who
to the legend.
Right. I remember seeing also as an undergrad, Black is Black 8, and being really inspired by Marlon's use of film to explore the vastness of Blackness.
So one thing I'm going to add to about the meal prep is, one thing I do is I add a bouillon cube. You can do like vegetable bouillon or chicken bouillon. So I'm doing chicken bouillon this time. So I just want to add that.
Let's see what I got going on in here.
You can or you can't do it. I find that it adds a little more flavor.
Awesome.
But in the spirit of flavor, yes, Marlon is, I mean, the legend, you know? And so definitely an inspiration for me, particularly the film Tongues Untied.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't mess with the Snap Diva.
This is a basic lesson in snap. Divarettes, listen up to this grand diva rap. Snaps can be for long, and snaps can be strong. To read, to punctuate, to cut like a whip.
Well, you got a domestic snap, you got a snap, then you've got Grand Diva snap.
Don't get it twisted.
Our dueling grand snap divas will now demonstrate the subtleties of snap to Divarette initiates. Precision, pacing, placement, poise. A sophisticated snap is more than just noise.
Repeat. Precision, poise, placement. You must perfect each for the grand snap statement.
You should know that a girl should be ambidextrous. You can't snap with both hands, you're out.
You know why we do this? Because we can't always get our arms free to do this.
Shout out to Marlon Riggs. I mean, we have to make a toast. I don't know if you have a little libation over there. I'm doing a little D'Emiliano 2014 Barolo.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Cheers to Marlon.
Indeed.
That the Institute of Snapology will never get old to me. You know, and it really, in a lot of ways, inspired shade compositions. which, as you know, being a Shade Compositions alum, is such a exercise in improvisation. And also just deeply connected to Black experience. You know, it's what we do and have done in the face of our complicated history. And so actually, when I started making that piece, I hadn't seen the film. And then in the midst of making it, then I saw the film and I was just like, oh my God, he's like talking to me from the grave. So okay, I got a nice little boil going here on my seasonings and butter. And so I'm just gonna bring the heat down just a bit. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna start adding flour. And you know, we're just gonna keep.
At this point, have you added like salt, pepper? Have you done that already?
I haven't added salt and pepper because I put a bouillon cube in it.
Okay.
But but you can do that. Yeah, you can do that now if you want. Just be light with it because we're gonna revisit the seasoning later too. And so when you put the flour in, you know, you put it in a bit at a time, just keep stirring. And then you put in a little bit more and you just keep stirring. Mine is popping a bit, so I'm gonna bring it down a little bit.
I love a colorful food situation, like a really expensive color palette.
Yeah.
And that's what this is giving me.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of color, I feel like I'm on my way to a brown color. What is yours looking like?
I'm still at like a beige, like a medium
beige.
Yeah,
okay. Fluorescent beige. So in the spirit of talking about brown, let's talk about soil, because I know that is a huge part of your practice. And what I would love to know is like talk about the genesis of soil in your work, because I remember Unearthing, which to me was like the first performance where you really kind of used soil, but you've obviously taken it to so many different levels since then. So talk a bit about the genesis of soil in your work.
Totally. So yeah, Unearthing was the first work that I did that included soil, and it was a live performance in which I sort of cover myself waist high in a mound of soil, and then I transform my body using paint and glitter and found flora. And at that point, when I was doing sort of live performance and like really interested in like being rooted in the soil, Unearthing became a metaphor for the process of self-discovery and self-actualization, of like, you know, finding and giving giving voice to like my own gender embodiment. And then I wanted to like, in my practice, kept exploring the possibilities of soil as a material, and I wanted to give shape to it. So I started making these sort of figurative sculptures, or like, yeah, these sculptures of like bodies on mounds of soil, and have explored it like as a sculptural material, as a pigment to sort of make marks on the surface of canvases. Conceptually, I think of soil as an alternative archive for histories that are obscured or erased. I'm particularly thinking about Black history. I think of soil as holding the possibility of transformation, because soil is like a catalyst for life. I think of soil as like a material through which I find that allows me to feel grounded. Yeah, so there are all these meanings that I like to like explore, that range, or like that mind, or allow me to think about the own conditions under which, you know, my own, the conditions that inform and the histories that inform my sense of self.
Mm-hmm. So how is your roux looking?
Now I'm at a really lovely brown.
Okay, great.
And it smells good, so it smells delectable.
Yeah, awesome.
Is this called, remind me, oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Is this called the is this the Holy Trinity?
This is the Holy Trinity.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the Holy Trinity. So also, we got to touch on, the madness that's going on in the world, right?
Mm.
And, one thing that was really inspiring to me, early last year during that most recent rash of killings of our people is when you did the pig roast. That was really inspiring to me because I was really going through it in that moment. And actually what comes to mind is Du Bois's theory of like a double consciousness. And we want to be hopeful in the American experiment, right? But at the same time, a naive sense of optimism is very dangerous. And so, I don't know, I feel like, my approach, when all of that was going on, I think as artists, we were all thinking about, what can we do? How can we respond to this? And, my approach was, how could I use, machine learning to deal with the trauma everybody was experiencing? And yours was the pig roast, which I just thought was like such a visceral and great and kind of like community-oriented response. And so yeah, can you talk a bit about that? Like what inspired you to do that? Was it healing for you and the folks who participated on some level or at all? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the pig roast in part was inspired by the pessimism I have around the failed American experience. And I, in particular, was appropriating at that time. I started appropriating like symbols of Americana that kind of evoke and was transforming them through cooking as a way to kind of confront a romanticized, idyllic notion of America, like American pride, etc. And so with the pig roast, I roasted 2 heritage suckling pigs in a park by my house in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. A few of my friends gathered around the fire pit, and we like slow roasted the pig. I think it was like 7 hours. So we started early, slow roasted it. When the pig was done, everyone, carved it out and ate it. And then I took the remnants, the heads of the pigs, and repurposed them for this kinetic sculpture, like 2 pig heads, one dressed in a cop hat, and mounted on a rotisserie. And for me, it was like, a part of the energy, very much a part of and drawn on like an abolitionist politics that many folks have articulated both way before this summer, but in particular this summer. I just wanted to like gather in the park with some folks and roast a whole hog pig as a kind of humorous, but also confrontational gesture.
Yeah, I love it. And then also, I felt like it was really aligned with the other project that you were doing that was more object-based, the fried flags. And so, yeah. Can you talk a bit about that?
With the fried flags, I was like definitely sort of looking at art history, in particular, like Black artists who were appropriating the symbol of American nationalism, like Pope L, like Sonia Clark, like Dred Scott. And I wanted to manipulate these flags that were previously flown over the Capitol building. And so as my way of transforming them, I started deep frying them, which in part because I really love to fry things. And then I was also thinking about like frying as like this alternative process of transforming, you know, an object, like this chemical reaction to like create a coating or distort the surface of an object. So that's what was going on with those fried flags.
Well, you know what I say.
Frying chicken just tend to make you feel better about life. At least me, anyway.
Okay. Not fried chicken makes me feel better about life.
that part of that movie just will never get old to me. So okay, now we're gonna move on to the mixture. So I got a nice kind of like golden brown roux going on here. What's yours?
Likewise.
Like?
Yeah, it's very
okay.
It's golden. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add our stock. You can do shellfish stock, you can do chicken stock, you can do water. So I'm doing chicken stock and I'm probably gonna put some water as well. So just go ahead and add that. And then we're gonna stir in after that our chicken and sausage.
So I'm doing like a seafood gumbo. Should I wait till like later in the process to add those?
Yeah, wait for the seafood. But you can put are you using a shellfish stock?
I am using a shellfish stock, yes.
Okay, so you can go ahead and put that in now.
Yeah, I did that.
Okay.
Actually, I
so
do have some
of...
plant-based andouille.
So yeah, just go ahead and add that. And I'm gonna add my chicken. We're gonna do so what seafood are you putting in later?
Let's see, I'm doing shrimp. I have some lump crab meat and some shucked oysters.
Okay, well, that's new. So then we're gonna really, I'm glad you told me that. Since you're doing that, we're gonna wait to put that in really towards the end, so that you know, because it's definitely gonna break down, but you know, so you can kind of maintain the form of it a bit, so it doesn't break down too much. Wow, I think I made a lot of roux.
Totally. Should my like all of my ingredients right now be submerged in
yes
the stock?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Let me show you mine. This is what mine looks like. It's I actually think I made a very huge roux.
Ooh, I love the coloration.
Yeah, you see? Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about roux, I'm curious to hear, I'm thinking about your works across live performance, across sculpture, across virtual reality. What is the roux that connects, you know, that's the like thorough line that connects your works across mediums?
Well, you know, I just go to the studio and think,
let me give her a new style, a new hairdo, a new cut, a new color.
That's what I think. That's really
right.
the roux. I mean, like, so no, I would say the roux is, I guess collage, and you know, collage is a conceptual and technical method that runs through all of the work, and I think also it's an interest in trying to make visible the power embedded in Black cultural production. And that's really where the title Black Magic comes from, is really trying to get to the source of that. And so, you know, in my work, you know, you see sort of the crown jewels of American culture being, you know, abstracted, like, you know, jazz, rock and roll, blues, funk, soul, Vogue femme performance, hip hop, gospel, all these different things you sort of put through my filter and abstracted, because I feel like all of those forms of Black cultural production were kind of born out of Black sociality. So they kind of all have this connection to like Black people coming together and being creative, and then this thing comes out of that experience. And I'm really kind of interested in that kind of, in what's born out of that experience of Black people coming together. And because to me, those things, you know, they come out and then they get sort of appropriated and attempted to be sold back to us. And so I think there, you know, and then there is this sort of vigilant practice of trying to keep us separated. And so I'm really interested in that, you know, that whole idea of like what comes out of like when Black people come together. And I think we all felt that, you know, in the wake of George Floyd's death last year, when we saw, you know, how, you know, Black people all over the country really galvanized and got in the streets and really started to push back against systemic racism and police violence. And I think that's only a glimpse of the power that we can really unleash when we unite. And so that sort of power that's at the center of that is something that I'm always trying to somehow make visible, whether that be in an object, in tech, within performance, an experience. Yeah, and so that would be my root. Yeah.
I love that. I love this idea of like Black sociality, and what also feels like a kind of transcendent and powerful and ecstatic kind of expressivity that occurs when Black people gather. I'm thinking in particular about a very, very early work of yours that I recall seeing, a video work in which a video work that includes like footage of Black folks in church. I'm curious to hear about like the inspiration behind that work and how some of those themes continue to like resonate and unfold in your more recent practice.
Yeah, that piece was a very early piece, and that was when I was really just learning, getting, you know, kind of getting my chops in as an editor. And I was really interested in like found footage. And I think that was like that early sort of gesture of collage, like working with found footage. But I was really interested in, you know, like growing up, I grew up, you know, Baptist in the South in Louisiana. And like, you know, we would go to church on Sunday and there was this woman named Miss Bernadine. And I just remember being a kid and Miss Bernadine would like every Sunday, she would give the Holy Ghost and she would just, like, she would go off. She would just be like, and it was really, she was really an interesting character because, you know, not for nothing, we grew up, you know, pretty poor. And she was in our community, someone who was like, who had a bit more wealth. So she was very composed. She was always like, she was a bit wealthy, but she went to the same church. But every Sunday she would just lose it and just kind of get in the spirit. And I was just like, what is that? Whatever she is going through, whatever she's accessing, you know, I want to connect to that. And I just became really obsessed with, you know, when people get deep in the throes of the Holy Ghost and, you know, how I could kind of bring that kind of rapture into my work. I was also kind of thinking a lot about how, you know, often people were like, oh, when you play music backwards, you can hear the devil, or that's the devil's music. And, you know, I really love the Barrett sisters, this gospel trio from Chicago. And they had, so I took their music and played it in reverse and then paired that with the imagery, and with imagery from various people experiencing the Holy Ghost, to try to kind of create something akin to that experience that I had as a kid, seeing, Miss Bernadine get the Holy Ghost, but also abstracting it through the music being in reverse and trying to kind of like take it somewhere
new. Part of why I find that particular work interesting in your body of work is in part because, and in part because of the spaces that the work is a part of. But I'm also, it like feels like not an aberration, but in terms of like the setup of your later works, in which you're like, a conductor, or you're like a choreographer, and you're like directing a choir or a sort of a group of dancers and musicians. And it's just a different sort of setup and relationship to the viewer and the audience. And that makes me sort of think about a question I have been thinking about a lot, and that we've been talking about, in terms of, I'm curious how you think about spectatorship, looking and being looked at, how you think about how the gaze operates within your live performances and your video work.
Okay, so before I get into that, I just want to say, now we're gonna fold in our andouille sausage. I don't know if are you doing that?
I do have a plant-based andouille sausage.
Okay, great. So now we're gonna go ahead and throw that in. So yeah, that is a pickle. I will tell you, it really is. I mean, like, it's something that I think that, I don't know, I think most Black artists are kind of figuring out how to negotiate that, because for me, yeah, I've always it's always been tricky. There was like this intended, like for me personally, like I am speaking directly to Black people, and to be more specific, Black queer people. Always. Now that's not to say that the other people can't, come into the conversation. Obviously, it's OTA, but like I'm definitely speaking to Black queer people, and I think, but so there's this intended audience, but then a lot of times when you're working within the canonized art world, the audience that ends up being the dominant audience may not always be that particular audience that you're speaking directly to. So you find yourself then performing this piece, and you're in this space where you're in this hegemonic institution, and you look into a sea of white faces, and there's something that just feels really odd and weird about these Black bodies up there performing. And so my strategy for sort of finding a way to deal with that was to really engage in a oppositional gaze. So I turn away from the audience. And so the sightline of all my performances to date are, as you know, me, speaking to the performers looking at me. So we're always in a cipher where we're like looking at each other. And so we're collectively working towards creating something, because the performances are very generative, like with, Five and Black Magic and things like that. We're producing these forms, these abstract forms that end up being prints and sculptures with shade compositions. We're producing a piece of, a minimalist piece of music. And so the audience's positionality is really on the periphery, and what they're doing is having the privilege of being able to witness us engage in our creative process, but which kind of moves away from this whole idea of us being on stage and being consumed. And so that's sort of my strategy at the moment for dealing with that. Yeah, what about you?
I also think about how to confront and negotiate in moments of like tension when operating sort of under a hegemonic white cis gaze as an artist. One one example of that being, you know, during the introduction of our talk, the white lady from Leslie-Lohman misgendered me. So for the record, my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I don't use he, him pronouns. But that's one of the challenges of being a Black trans femme queer artist, negotiating and navigating hegemonic art world institutions. And so for me, in my live performances, as a way to try and circumvent or subvert the ways in which either white, cis, patriarchal fantasies of my body are being projected onto me, or from resisting or trying to contend with my body being, or my image being fetishized. I also, in live performances, like in my last performance, Meditations on the Making of America, for the most part, like my back is facing the audience, and also like the viewer, when you see the video, the viewer like first, like, you know, sees my back, and for the duration of the performance, the viewer like sees me in action, like sees me manipulating and making marks on the canvas, such that, you know, the focus on the piece is like, you know, the transformation that is taking place, the work that I am doing. So like being engaged in a process and being engaged in movement, and, you know, positioning my back to the camera are sort of strategies in live performance that I employ.
Yeah, it is a really complicated thing. And I think these are all strategies, right? And they're probably going to change over time. But I think the true thing that needs to change is the spaces that we're working in. And to me, that kind of calls to mind just like the role of community in both of our work, you know. Also, for those who don't know, Kiyan was an intern at my studio. And, you know, I so miss your presence all the time in the studio, as you know. But like, but yeah, it calls to mind community and makes me think about, like for me, another strategy that came out of thinking about that kind of the problem of performing in hegemonic spaces, and also exhibiting in hegemonic spaces. I'll go off on another tangent for 1 second. Like for me, when I did like the King of Arms tincture that's on the Leslie-Lohman Museum, and that was incorporated into the Times Square video project, and is also in my house, which you can see right here, is really that imagery was originally in a collage, and then it became the vinyl that was used on the float for the first King of Arms parade in New Orleans. And then I kind of started to think about it, and I looked at it as my kind of almost like my armor, my protective shell that I put in the space. So like when I'm exhibiting in these, you know, hegemonic spaces, I can kind of present this, I can put up this shell and then put my work in that space as a way to create a more liberatory experience for exhibiting and having my work be experienced. And so that was a strategy too. But then also just kind of, I remember I was in 2012, I was, you know, by that point I had done 5 at the Whitney Biennial. I had done it at ICA Boston. And I had done a couple of like spin-off projects with folks in the community. And I was kind of emerging as almost like this kind of like agent of Vogue Femme performers. And I started to find myself in this position where like people were coming to me and they were like, oh, we're doing a gala, do you have some performers who would come? And it was just becoming this thing where people thought I was this person you come to kind of like send Vogue performers to like these like super stuffy white events for them to dance for them. And I was just like, get the entire fuck out of here. Like, that's not what I do. That's not what folks want to do. And so I kind of like was like, how do I deal with this? Also, I'm gonna put my, you can put your bay leaves in now too, and also okra.
Oh yes, I forgot about the okra.
Are you doing fresh okra?
No, I'm doing frozen okra.
Okay, good. I was hoping you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better for this. So yeah, you can put your okra in now. So anyway, yeah, so at that time I was thinking a lot about that. And then I was kind of like, well, I want to I'm doing this work with this community, this Black queer community that inspires me. And I wanted to kind of stop presenting that work in those kind of spaces. And that from that, the King of Arms Art Ball was born. And it was really a way for me to kind of almost create my own institution. So the King of Arms Art Ball was like this space in which, you know, I can make youth within the community aware of, you know, Black queer artists that they may or may not have already known. And then also in a lot of ways too, it was bringing in, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's that dual consciousness thing, right? Like we are a part of this Black queer community, but then we also are part of an artist community, which is, you know, a different space. And so it was a way to kind of like bring them in together. And so it was exposing the community to Black queer artists they may not have known, but then also exposing, you know, folk in the art world, whether they be Black or not, but to, you know, performance practices and a culture that maybe they didn't know. But, you know, but definitely, and I felt comfortable doing it because, you know, what you do know is, you know, that culture, you're not going to come in there being disrespectful. So I felt like the culture of the space was already established, so I can bring them in, and I didn't have to be like labor over whether or not the people coming into that space were going to be disrespectful, because I knew that as soon as anyone got out of place, they would be handled by somebody in the space. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was kind of like, oh, this would be a way for me to kind of make this work in a space that felt more comfortable. And then it kind of, you know, it kept going, and it has become sort of an institution. And I see it almost like a social practice or education process where like I can, you know, make, you know, even like artists like yourself and so on, like a lot of times people don't know who folk are. And it's like, what does it look like for me to be like, oh, this is Kiyan Williams, and give them, you know, a background on your work and be like, okay, so let's translate this to the ballroom floor. And it's always really fun and interesting to see the artists, see people in ballroom kind of like reimagine their work on the ballroom floor. And so it's become sort of like its own thing. And so, yeah, that's another mode of dealing with that whole problem of like being looked at.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, what you just said, it reminded me of like a piece of advice that I really, really take to heart that I got when I was in college from a prolific Black queer scholar and performer, E. Patrick Johnson. And I remember he told me, and I had just graduated from undergrad, and we were like having lunch at this like queer study or this performance studies conference. And he was like, you know, you have to be, you kind of have to be everywhere, right? Like you can operate within the institution, whatever, be it the academy, be it, you know, being like an art institution, but you also, you know, you have to be in the hood, you have to be in a community, you have to be outside of it. You kind of have to show up everywhere. And so I think about, you know, that's sort of one of the impulses like that inspired me to have a barbecue and call it art and, you know, gather with folks. You know, that's the same kind of energy, or like the same energy, like, you know, that the King of Arms Ball cultivates, right? It's like creating these like dynamic art experiences outside, literally outside sometimes, but under like literally a building and under conditions that are more hospitable.
Yeah. Okay, so what is your gumbo looking like now?
She's looking quite lovely. She's looking quite lovely. She's like, the roux is brown.
Is it a darker brown than before?
It hasn't gotten darker.
Okay.
But I think I might add some Worcester sauce.
Yeah, that would help. So I
How
think
was
we
your
need to
roux?
just let it, like, it's looking good. It's kind of similar. I think we need to kind of just let it cook for a while. Where's your heat is on medium?
Yes, on medium. Should it be higher or lower?
Okay. No, that's fine. Medium is good. So let's just let it cook for a while, and then we're gonna add the seafood right before we kind of add some more seasoning, and then we'll serve it up.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So yeah, I think now we can open it up to questions. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm down. That sounds great.
Okay. So are there any questions?
Hi guys, this is Daisy. Hi Rashaad, hi Kiyan. I'm just opening up my channel and I'm gonna ask some questions on behalf of our audience. So I think for us, the first question we wanna ask you is what are some things you do to recharge yourself to keep fighting the good fight?
You wanna go first or you want me?
Sure, I'll jump in. Actually cooking is like such a big part of my like holistic self-care practice. Both in terms of like being engaged in like the physical act of cooking, but also like taking like the time to like make and feed myself food that I enjoy, that I find nourishing. So like I typically cook every day. I also find going on hikes and like being outside and going on bike rides with friends, like anything I can do to like be outside and be active is like very deeply restorative. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, we are like the same person. So many of the same things. I mean, I try to cook every day too. And actually, making this transition to California has been really great because there's a certain way in which there's a connection to nature that's not as just like readily available in New York City. Don't get me wrong, I love New York City.
Right.
But like, it's been really interesting to be here, and the whole idea of like having a yard and being able to grow food.
Right.
And not only being able to make food, but like grow food and then go in your yard and pick the food and bring it in. It's like life cycle. And you make food.
Come
so
on,
like
farm
that,
to table.
Right. So that and yeah, and then also, with the pandemic, because everything's shut down, there's so many parks. I mean, just in the East Bay alone, there's just like countless parks. And so you can really be outside, and there's all these like really, beautiful and picturesque spaces that you can go to. And so like doing hikes and going on walks is really good, but also meditation. I've been really getting deep into meditation, specifically surrounding my current project, with EYEBEAM being 1.5. Yeah, so like that, and yeah, and then also just making work. Sometimes just being in the studio and being in the space of just like making work. I mean, for me, that really is my lifeline. That's like my lifeline. I need to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm here with you in terms of maybe that's another root of the work or the studio practice, like how it serves your own sense of like vitality, which I totally resonate with.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual experience, right? It's almost like a religion because you're basically like, I'm gonna pour myself, my money, my energy into this thing with no real, kind of promise of return.
Right.
But you just have this sort of belief that like that's what you should do and that's what you want, and you connect to other people through that. And so yeah,
totally. And there's this
sustains me.
There's like a sense of like devotion to the practice, right? Like you get up and you do it every day, like you're devoted to it. Yeah, it does feel very much like a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
That's great.
So wait, before we go to the next question, I just want to say, Kiyan, just keep stirring, okay? You're continuing to stir? Yeah.
Yes.
Keep stirring. Yeah. Okay. What's the next question?
Great. And I think what might be the last question for us is what's next for both of you?
Well, what's next for me is later this month on the 17th, I will be presenting a project that I've been working on since last summer as part of the EYEBEAM Rapid Response Fellowship. And it was, it's the intermediary between the first generation of my AI project being and the second one that I'm working on now. Right now, I'm doing a residency at Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, and I'm working on being 2.0. But in response to the recent rash of killings of unarmed Black folks early last year, I was really thinking a lot about like, how could I use this machine learning model as a way to put a dent in the anxiety and depression and hopelessness that a lot of folk were experiencing. And so I've been working on developing a racial trauma therapy app called Being 1.5. And it's sort of a therapy app meets life coach, meets connector. And so Being uses the technique of EMDR and to help people kind of get back to center when they find themselves in the throes of a racial aggression. And then also gives them tools to kind of stay in the fight. So like mindfulness, like traditional mindfulness meditation, but then also meditative walks, and then different forms of therapy as well. Like so much of the research I've been doing with the therapists that I'm consulting with and scientists are sort of rooted in a Eurocentric idea. And so I've been thinking a lot about, diasporic forms of healing and how some of that often is around people coming together and dancing. So I'm developing this dance therapy. And so, yeah, that's what's next for me.
Oh, exciting. I can't wait to see my sib, the being, again.
Yeah.
Let's see, what's going on for me? I am like settled in my new studio, which I'm so excited about. And thank you. It was so good. I had a really great studio day today. And I'm working towards I'm building this new body of work in which I'm continuing to make sculptural forms out of soil, but now I'm also growing sculptural forms out of mycelium.
Yes. Okay. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited about this. I believe I saw a a test on Instagram, right? Didn't you post
I posted a study.
Okay,
it was like the first.
What's going on?
I'm like my studio basically is like a laboratory. I'm like growing different body parts out of mycelium, which is fungi. And once they they're inoculated into like an organic substrate, but then once they grow and they blossom, it's kind of like a fiber, like a hard fiber. And I was sort of looking at and inspired by like the realm of sustainable design, in which like designers, for decades now have been using fungi and mycelium as like a sustainable, renewable material that doesn't have like a harmful impact on the world. And for me, I'm using, the material as another metaphor with which to think about Blackness, queer, trans identity, and our relationship, like ecology, our relationship to the land, to our communities, to movements of resistance. And so I'm making these sculptures of soil and mycelium, and then I'm also writing a book about all of what I just said. So very excited. I'll be like deep in the studio over these next few months. And then I'll be showing these, depending on, the conditions of the pandemic, I'm supposed to be showing the first iterations of this work in some galleries in New York and Canada.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. I can't wait to to the Rona stops windmilling us. So like
Ooh,
things open up and we can see each other again.
Totally.
I'm so tired of being windmilled by them.
Right.
Okay. I think now, what is your gumbo looking like?
I have a nice brown, but like a brown herb roux. More importantly, it smells really good.
Yeah. Did you put chicken in?
I did not use chicken.
You didn't do chicken. Okay. So I think
No.
now you can go ahead and start to put your seafood in. Yeah.
Rashaad and Kiyan, we actually have one more question while we put
Yeah.
it in.
Okay.
This one is directed towards Kiyan. So Kiyan, your work incorporates ecological concerns and connects them to Black history and experience. What some theorists call the Black Anthropocene. How do you make some of those connections explicit?
I would call it the Black Plantationocene. And by that intervention, I just mean that like so much of our contemporary life is informed by the wreckage of the plantation model that emerged out of chattel slavery, like monoculture, monocropping, that simultaneously like subjugated and extracted, labor from people of West African descent, and also extracted, resources from, the landscape across Southern America and the Caribbean, in ways that, we're still dealing with and confronted by. But I say all that to say that I often source soil from sites of significance in the diaspora. So like some of my previous work that was shown today, I source soil from plantations in the American South and in the Caribbean, or I'll source soil from like former docks where enslaved folks first touched land in the New World. And then in my most recent work, Reaching Towards Warmer Suns, I installed like a public work at a site along the James River in Virginia. And so site specificity is really important to me, but also like, fleshing, like using like the actual materials for me, like I said, are like alternative archives that carry these histories that continue to animate and are deeply embedded in, the land we walk every day. I hope that answered your question.
It really does, and in such a poignant and beautiful way. So thank you for that. I have one more question, and I think this will be our last question. As artists, and this is for both Kiyan and Rashaad, as artists of color, how do you grapple with predominantly white-centered funding systems?
So before we answer that, Kiyan, I just want to say now you can put in whatever, like, like seasoning, like, salt, pepper, whatever you want to put in. I think this would be a good time to put in that. I use chili pepper, turmeric, cayenne, salt, black pepper, and Italian seasoning. And then you want to put in some gumbo fila if you have it. I don't have it right now because it ran out, but you don't need it. If you have it, also, you can put it in. So the question was, can you please say it again?
Yes, of course. As artists of color, how do you grapple with the predominantly white-centered funding systems?
Yeah. How do you grapple with it? I mean, like, it is what it is. I mean, like, I think that question really has to acknowledge that we are existing within systemic racism. And so, because of that, there are certain folk who have access to funds, more funds than other people. And I'm grateful that those funds are being made available to me to do the work that I'm able to do. But I think the true test of getting those funds and kind of getting in the bed with those kind of people to make your work is when you can do it, and you can do it in a way that is not at your expense, or is not somehow where you don't have to kind of compromise your work or your belief system. And so I think, you have to just kind of go into that situation with a real sense of self and your work and what you want to do, and be vigilant about that. And then you can sort of use those funds. The sad truth is that oftentimes you will find yourself in spaces where you're receiving funds from people and they are not really aligned with you. And then you have to kind of, sort of almost be like a Robin Hood, where you like use those funds and redistribute them in a way that gives you and whatever community you're representing optimal well-being. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing struggle, which is why I would say Black folk who care about art and who have funds should really support Black artists, because we need that kind of support. Yeah.
Hey. Ooh, well, I think I got some turmeric in my sinuses. I would approach that question. Firstly, I just have to say, I personally don't identify as a person of color. I identify as a Black person. But I
want to say that I want to say this too. Like, I totally hear you on that, and like, but when you asked the question, I just assumed you were talking about Black people. Would that be accurate?
All right, totally.
I'm asking Daisy. Would that be accurate?
I don't know.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Because I think that whole people of color thing, to me, oftentimes it feels like a way to sort of like minimize the experience of Black people in America. And so, yeah, I'm a Black person. I'm not a person of color.
Well, let me rephrase the question. As Black artists, how would you navigate? How do you navigate funding? Predominantly white funding systems.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, Kiyan.
Yeah, like I would approach that question. Like for me, like knowing that I am always like, no one lives outside of, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. I have to like first know that I'm in it. And so like, what do I do to negotiate that? For me, what's most important for me is like centering my needs. And like, much like we were talking about earlier, like, what does the art do for you? How does the art center your own vitality? I know that I need to make art. I know that like, I also need resources and funding to make art. And so I just kind of center myself and like, my need to make art when I'm and try and be like really authentic to that. And also, when I'm writing grants and proposals, I'm like very, very intentional about, like, I do a lot of research for like, most of my projects are like research based, but I'm very like, I don't include like autobiographical experiences, because like, not everybody needs to know my life, and my life isn't accessible to everybody. And my art is, and there's a distance between my lived experience and my art. And I also, like, when I'm writing grants and stuff, both I don't like include autobiographical experience, and I like don't reproduce like narratives of like trauma, which can be very marketable for white funders. I really root my projects in like either history or theory, or in like an emancipatory practice. That's how I always frame it. Yeah, so that's my strategy. Or like, that's how I negotiate this.
Yeah. These are good questions. There's no more questions?
That was a good question.
I think that's
Oh, my
it
roofs,
from-
my gumbo sounds good.
Yeah, mine does too.
I wish you could taste mine and I could taste yours because I'm curious. I'm gonna do a little taste test.
Look,
You want to
when
like
the Rona
FedEx
stops
overnight me?
When the Rona stops whirlwind windmilling us, you will come to the Bay. I will come to New York, and we will make gumbo again together.
Another gumbo question.
Yes.
So, you know, in the Northeast or like in the Mid-Atlantic, you know, Black people put Old Bay seasoning on all seafood. You know, crabs, shrimp. Can I put it in gumbo?
Yes. I mean, as I said before in the very beginning, this is an improvisational process. You know, you have some people that are purists and they're like, the gumbo has to be like X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you know, there is a sort of excuse me. Spices are getting me. Thank you. There is sort of like a scaffolding of like how it's made, but you can really improvise. Like you're putting, like I have never heard of somebody putting crab meat, like a loose crab meat in gumbo, but I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting, you know?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so yeah, you can improvise, and you know, you kind of have to make it your own. Yeah. So mine is looking good.
Can I see? I see what yours looks like?
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Can you see it?
I can't. I can only see myself.
Okay, you can see it now.
Okay, yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool.
Oh, that
and I
looks
see
lovely.
yours, and yours, it looks the same. Ours looks the same. Yeah. So
mine isn't as viscous, but mine's is a little more viscous. Should I put more flour in it, or is it too late for that?
No. You want it to break down and be more viscous. Yeah. So like
Okay,
actually, you know, let it cook more on a low heat so that it can do that.
Okay.
But Kiyan, it was such. I mean, you already know. You already know it was such a pleasure to have you do this talk with me, and thank you to everybody who came online to cook this meal with us. And I want to give a special shout out to Leslie-Lohman, to EYEBEAM, to Times Square Arts, and everybody involved in the Black Magic Project. I encourage you all to go to the Leslie-Lohman website and look at the video Black Magic. I want to give a special shout out to all the performers who I've been working with for well over a decade who are in this piece. You will see some incredible performers, musicians, dancers, the whole nine. And yeah, and so in the spirit of Black Magic, as we leave this this Zoom, I want to share with you some scenes from a little bit of Black Magic that we sprinkled on NYC and Times Square in December. So thank you, and have a good night or day, whatever coast you're on.